Hi, I'm Wendy Gardiner. Welcome to Learn to Sew Today. In Learn to Sew Today, I'm going to show you how to alter clothes, how to decorate home projects, and how to make lots of lovely things for you, your family and your friends. And you don't have to be a sewing expert, you can be an absolute beginner. I'm going to show you how to stitch a cafetiere cover. So we're going to patch some pieces together, do some top stitching or some quilting through all the layers. We're going to add velcro, we're going to have a flap. So this cafetiere cover fits around the cafetiere and then is velcroed together at the back, so it's going to keep the coffee lovely and warm while you have a long leisurely breakfast. So to get the cover, first of all you measure around the cafetiere and then you're going to have to add seam allowances, but all the measurements to do that are in the book Learn to Sew Today. Then I'm going to stitch together my patches. I've decided to make it in patches. So now I'm ready to sew 3 of the patches together. This is going to be made up of 6, so I sew them into 2 rows of 3. So firstly 2 patches. And I'm going to use a 1/4 inch foot. And on this foot here, this is a Janome foot, and it has a little metal guide on the right hand side which sits below the bottom of the foot. The fabric butts up against that guide and the needle then goes through the middle here, which is exactly a 1/4 inch from that edge. So it makes sure you stitch a nice smooth 1/4 inch all the way. If your machine doesn't come with a foot like this, do invest in one. They really are worth every penny. Make it so much easier to stitch perfect 1/4 inch seams. And then I stitch another to the other side. If you notice, I'm not starting right on the very end. I'm starting about a 1/4 inch in. I can go back, but if you try and start at the very, very end, it gets pulled down into the feed dog, so we want to avoid that. And by using that foot with that guide, I can be sure that I've got lovely perfect seam allowances, so when I attach my 2 pieces together they should match perfectly. So I'm just going to press open those seam allowances. I'm going to finger press them open and then I'm going to put them on top, match those seam allowances, match the seams there. So first of all I pin at the seams to make sure they match, and then I can match the rest of the edges. If they don't match perfectly, I'm going to snip just little tiny snips into that bottom layer, which is the tighter layer, just like that, so that when I pull it slightly it fits perfectly. So that's now ready to press on the ironing board, and then I'm going to attach my flap on the side. So I make sure that it's halfway between, so I can literally make sure it's right by pressing a crease, and then with the right sides together I will stitch that onto there. So I can do that before I properly press this if I finger press open the seam underneath first, and again I make sure that that crease lines up with that seam, pin that in place and stitch. And this is the flap that is going to have velcro attached to it, and then it will fold over and velcro to the other side to hold the cosy in place. Now I go to the ironing board to iron that out. So there it is, all nicely pressed and ready. So I have made the lining fabric the same size as the finished panel here. Just literally cut it out as one piece. Put on the flap, same size as the flap that's on the main piece. Cut a piece of wadding which is the same size as the main piece. Wadding first, lining right side up, and then the main fabric right side down, matching up all of the edges including the flap. Pin through all the layers, and then we're going to stitch all the way around, leaving a turning gap in the bottom edge. So my usual trick, double pin, and that will remind me, and I'm going to leave it between this bottom panel here. So I'm going to stitch over the seams so I haven't got a seam in the turning gap, and I will stitch all the way around including around my flap. Straight stitch, forward, reverse just to anchor those stitching, and away I go. I'm using the edge of the presser foot, and this time I've got my regular presser foot on, so I'm actually taking a seam which is about 3/8 of an inch or about 1 centimetre. Stop with the needle down, so you pivot. When I get to the flap, yet again, stitch just beyond it, about 1 centimetre, so that I can pivot again, always with the needle down. Needle down, raise the presser foot, twist the fabric. So here I am, back to my double pin, so I know now that I stop at this point. Take the pins out, just go beyond that seam, so I haven't got the seam to contend with in the turning gap. Reverse stitch to anchor the stitching, and there we are. So that's all stitched together. I'm going to cut the corners at angles. This gives a crisper turned through corner. And the other thing I can do, if I want to, if it's too bulky, is I can trim away some of the edge of the fluff that's in the seam allowance. Just that, not the actual fabric beneath. So it's just carefully making sure you're just catching the fluff only, the wadding only. Leaving the turning gap alone, because that way makes it easier to turn through if you've got plenty of seam allowance to deal with. Cutting that away at the corners, and this will help turn the corners through nicely. Then turn it back over, and where the flap joins the main fabric, difficult to see, but the stitching goes along there and then it pivots and goes along onto the flap. So I need to cut into this corner so that when I turn it through, it will turn through nicely. So I'm using my little scissors because I don't want to inadvertently cut through the stitching. And I'm going to then use my big scissors, where I've cut that, to trim down some of that seam allowance, get it out of the way. So now when I turn that through, I should get a nice corner. So that's now ready to press. Tucking the raw edges in on the turning gap, and you can slip stitch those closed by hand. So I've knotted the end of the thread and hidden the knot inside, and then I'm literally going to go along. I go in through the top, through to the bottom fabric, just go along a little bit, just about 1/8 of an inch, about 3 millimeters, back up through the top fabric, back down through the top into the bottom fabric, about 1/8 of an inch along, back up to the top fabric. And if I do that neatly, I can make it almost invisible, and that just literally slip stitches those two edges together. Having slip stitched that opening closed, I'm now ready to quilt. There are different methods I can use, but the one I'm going to use first on this is I'm going to stitch about 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch, away from the seam around each of my little patches. That's one method. Let me try that one. I've increased the stitch length to nearly 3 because I'm top stitching through lots of layers, and I'm also not starting on a corner, starting a little way along one edge. Stop, pivot, so I'm making sure that the edge of the foot is going along this seam. And then back to the beginning. And I'm just going to reverse a couple of stitches to anchor the threads. So I repeat that round each of the squares, and it gives it that nice quilted feeling. So that's the finished quilting. So each of the little squares, or little rectangles in this case, I've stitched around, stitching a centimetre from the edge each time, all the way round. And I use the edge of the presser foot as my guide. So the next stage is I'm going to add the velcro. So one piece of the velcro will go onto the underside of the flap, and the other piece will go onto the main cosy. So I divide my velcro up, and this is actually a sticky back one, which is brilliant for positioning, so I can position that on. Just centre it in that position, and then I'm going to stitch all the way round the edge, because although it's sticky, it won't stay on fabric all the time. Now, I've called it Velcro because that's what we all know it as, but of course actually what it is hook and loop tape, and other brands are available. Basically one half of it has little hooks and the other half has fluff, and the little hooks grab onto the fluff. Doesn't really matter which side you put on which part of the cosy. If you were doing it on a garment, you would put the hooky side, the rough side, on the piece that's going to be away from the skin, not facing the skin. And again, you can see I didn't start on a corner, I started down one edge. So having sewn the first piece of Velcro on, position the next piece on top, peel away the paper backing, so it's now tacky, and I'm going to carefully poke it through the handle and bring that round. So I want to position it where it's going to be for a nice snug fit. And then push that in place, and then hopefully if I can peel off one of the pieces, keeping that in place underneath. There we are. So I'm just going to straighten that up now, and that's ready. So I now stitch that in place, knowing it's in the right position to be velcroed onto the pot. So there it is, finished. Velcro on that side, Velcro on the underside. So I wrap it around my pot, bring my flap through, and then I can Velcro it in place to keep my coffee lovely and snug while I have a long leisurely breakfast.